In 1852, on a remote Georgia cotton plantation, a wealthy widow named Catherine Henley called her two teenage daughters to the sweeping front porch at dawn. It was a morning like any other, or so it seemed, but what she uttered next would echo through generations, twisting the lives of her family and countless others into a knot of unimaginable horror. Neighbors later swore they heard her say, "Plain as day, you will give me grandchildren, and the seed will be black." Just picture that scene for a moment. The dew still clinging to the magnolias, the first rays of sun hitting the grand columns, and a mother calmly dictating a future so perverse, so calculated, it beggars belief. Within a year, both girls were pregnant, not by suitors of their own class, not by men they chose, but by two enslaved men Catherine herself had meticulously selected. She wasn't just observing, she was orchestrating. She kept handwritten ledgers, just like a meticulous breeder tracking livestock. Every coupling, every birth, every death was noted with chilling precision, as if she were running a horse breeding program rather than managing human lives. Those pages, those cold, calculating records, still exist. They sit in the state archives today, a stark and undeniable testament to a story so calculated, so utterly devoid of humanity, it makes your stomach churn. Today, we're going to follow that paper trail. We'll listen to the oral memories passed down through whispers and guarded conversations, and we'll examine the DNA evidence that finally, irrevocably, exposed what Catherine Henley audaciously called her dynasty of mixed blood. By the end of our journey, you'll understand how she twisted logic to justify such an unspeakable plan, how her own daughters, against all odds, fought back in ways Catherine never anticipated, and why some of the children she so coldly engineered vanished forever into the brutal machinery of slavery, while others became the founding members of a small Georgia town that still, to this day, bears the Henley name. It's a story that challenges everything we think we know about family, power, and the enduring human spirit. 20 seconds. Can you even picture this? A mother, a woman who birthed and raised her own flesh and blood, signing her daughters up for repeated sexual assault, then naming the resulting babies after Roman emperors. Her goal? To breed greatness, she claimed. How does a woman wake up one morning, look at her own children, her own blood, and decide they are nothing more than brood mares? What kind of twisted logic allows someone to view their daughters as mere vessels, their reproductive capabilities a means to an end? And perhaps even more compelling, how do the sons and daughters born from that horrific scheme, those children Catherine thought she owned even before they drew their first breath, outsmart the woman who believed she held absolute dominion over their very existence? Keep listening, because the answers, I promise you, are far uglier and far more complex than you think. Georgia in 1852 wasn't just a place, it was a fever dream of cotton money. The crop had exploded, surging from a mere 10 million pounds in 1800 to a staggering 400 million by the mid-century. This wasn't just growth, it was an economic revolution, and every spike in demand, every new textile mill in the North or in England pushed plantation owners to find fresh, cheap labor. The insatiable hunger for cotton meant an insatiable hunger for enslaved people. Slave prices, as a direct result, had tripled in just 2 decades. A prime field hand auctioned in Savannah could command a price that easily exceeded the cost of a modest house in Boston. This wasn't just an investment, it was the bedrock of the entire Southern economy, and human beings were the capital. And underpinning this brutal economic reality was a chilling legal framework. Partus sequitur ventrum. Literally, it means the offspring follows the womb. This single line of code, this legal precedent, was a cornerstone of American slavery. It decreed that any child born to an enslaved woman automatically inherited her enslaved status, regardless of the father's identity. This wasn't just a legal technicality, it was a devastating economic engine. It turned human wombs into profit centers, transforming the reproductive capacity of enslaved women into a guaranteed, self-perpetuating labor force. And it turned women like Catherine Henley into self-taught, utterly ruthless geneticists. Now, Catherine wasn't unique in forcing enslaved women to bear children. That was a tragically common, horrifying practice across the South, a calculated strategy to increase stock and maintain the labor supply. But Catherine, She took that grotesque logic one step further. She wanted the blood of her white daughters mixed with that of her most valuable enslaved men. Why? Because the resulting children would then be both legally enslaved, thanks to partus sequitur ventrum, and, crucially, genetically tied to her. In her mind, this hybrid dynasty, this grotesque intertwining of family lines, would guarantee her a labor force that could never be sold away. It would carry her own DNA, her own lineage, making them, in her twisted logic, irrevocably hers. She even bragged about it, in a letter discovered just last year. "I shall not lose my stock to creditors, or death, for they shall be of me," she penned, her words chillingly clear. That letter, found tucked away in a cousin's dusty attic, is now carefully preserved at Emory University. Historians who've read it describe a visceral sense of dread, hearing the chilling echo of modern trafficking manuals. Control the body, control reproduction, control profit. It's a stark reminder that while the specifics of Catherine's plan were uniquely perverse, the underlying mechanisms of control and exploitation are, tragically, timeless. This was not merely the madness of one woman. It was the ultimate, horrifying distillation of a system that commodified human beings and rewarded reproductive coercion with immense wealth. Catherine's land wasn't some small patch. It was an empire stretching across the fall line hills where the Piedmont meets the coastal plain. We're talking 2,800 acres of rich red clay and fertile river bottom, a massive operation. On the official books, she enslaved 133 people, but family letters, those private whispers on paper, hint that the real number hovered closer to 160. Why the discrepancy? Because Catherine, ever the calculating businesswoman, never reported infants under 6 months. They were just future assets, not yet worth the official count. It speaks volumes about the dehumanization at the heart of her enterprise. She inherited this sprawling estate at 29, a young widow left with 2 girls, Julia, 13, and Adeline, 11, and a mountain of debt after her husband succumbed to cholera. Most widows in that era would have married quickly, seeking male protection and economic stability. Not Catherine. She was cut from a different cloth. Instead, she doubled down on cotton, purchased 40 more people at auction, and immediately began a stud ledger that reads less like a family history and more like livestock notes. Entries like Ben, age 24, strong teeth, good breeder, paired with Grace, 1839, twins born 1840, are not anomalies. They are the norm. It's a stark, horrifying window into her mind, where human beings were reduced to their reproductive capacity, their value measured in offspring. Her obsession with control was absolute. After her husband's death, she moved her bedroom directly above the jail block. "Can you imagine," she wrote with chilling candor, "that she did this so I may hear the groans and no work proceeds?" That jail block, a grim testament to her cruelty, still stands today. The timber door, scarred and worn, shows deep grooves where iron shackles once rubbed, polishing the wood with the desperate movements of those imprisoned within. Tour guides at the site now mention Catherine only in whispers, if at all, a testament to the lingering unease and dark reputation. But older black residents nearby, those whose families carried the oral histories, they called her the Night Hen, a haunting play on her married name and the eerie sound of her carriage rolling in after midnight to inspect pregnant women with a lantern. She was a specter of fear, a constant watchful presence, ensuring her grotesque vision of a self-perpetuating labor force was meticulously maintained. By the winter of 1852, Julia Henley, just 14 years old, had begun to menstruate. For most girls, this is a private, natural milestone. For Julia, it was a signal, a grim countdown to the beginning of her forced motherhood. Within weeks, Catherine ordered the girl brought to the weaving house after dark. The setting itself, a place of creation and industry, was twisted into a chamber of violation. Also present was an enslaved man named Abram, 26. Abram was a skilled cooper whose father Catherine rented out for cash, making him a valuable asset in her perverse scheme. According to Abram's later agonizing testimony to the Freedmen's Bureau, Catherine offered him a tin cup of brandy, a cruel gesture of false generosity, and then delivered her chilling command, "You will lie with my daughter until she swells, and if you speak of it, I will sell you south to the rice swamps." The threat wasn't subtle. It was a promise of a living hell, a fate worse than death for many enslaved people. Abram, despite the terror, tried to refuse. He tried to resist this unimaginable order, but Catherine's overseer, her enforcer, clubbed him across the back with a hoe handle, brutally reminding him of the absolute powerlessness he faced. This horrific scene wasn't a one-off event. It repeated, week after week, for 3 agonizing months. The systematic nature of it is what truly grinds you down, the relentless, calculated assault on Julia's body and Abram's will. Then, in April 1853, Julia missed her cycle. Catherine, ever the cold record-keeper, recorded the event in her ledger with a single, triumphant word: success. It wasn't a pregnancy, it was a successful breeding. Immediately after confirming Julia's condition, Catherine moved her to a locked attic room, isolating her, controlling every aspect of her existence. She fed her hog's foot broth laced with laudanum, presumably to keep her docile, quiet, and compliant. And then, with the same chilling efficiency, she repeated the entire process with 12-year-old Adeline. The younger sister, barely a child herself, was subjected to the same unspeakable ordeal. Both girls delivered boys in the same week of January 1854. Catherine, with her perverse classical aspirations, named them Romulus and Remus. Not children, you see, but the mythical founders of an empire. Her empire, built on the shattered lives and forced reproduction of her own daughters and enslaved men. It was a grotesque mockery of lineage, a dynasty forged in trauma and pain. Julia and Adeline spent 4 long, agonizing years locked away above their mother's bedroom. Can you imagine the suffocating isolation? They were allowed no visitors, no books to escape into, no mirrors to even see their own reflections. Catherine, in her paranoia, feared glass might become a weapon, a shard to lash out, or perhaps a way for them to glimpse the horror in their own eyes. It was a prison designed to break their spirits, to strip them of any agency or connection to the outside world. Each girl bore 3 more children during their captivity, each fathered by different enslaved men. Catherine rotated for what she chillingly called diverse stock. The term itself, ripped from the lexicon of animal husbandry, underscores the utter dehumanization at play. Julia, at 19, would be pregnant for the 5th time. The cycle was relentless, brutal, and seemingly inescapable. Yet even in that suffocating confinement, a flicker of resistance remained. The girls' only overt rebellion came through silence. They refused to speak to their mother, except for the most basic requests, like asking for water. It was a quiet, desperate act of defiance, a refusal to acknowledge her authority in any meaningful way. But there were other, more clandestine forms of rebellion. Enslaved women assigned as nurses, risking severe punishment, smuggled scraps of paper to the attic. And Julia, with a desperate hope, scratched out prayers with charcoal, pouring her anguish onto those tiny fragments. One of those scraps, a testament to her enduring spirit, miraculously survived the passage of time. It reads, "Lord, let my babies breathe free air, even if I never do." A county historian poring over old records found that line quoted in an 1898 church pamphlet, held up as an example of perseverance. But at the time, no one knew the profound, heartbreaking context that Julia wrote those words while her own children, her own flesh and blood, remained in bondage, born into a system that denied them their very humanity. It's a powerful reminder of the hidden histories, the quiet acts of resistance that often go unrecorded, but which speak volumes about the human spirit's refusal to be utterly crushed. Catherine's cruelty, you see, wasn't a singular focused laser. It was a double-edged sword, cutting both ways. Enslaved men like Abram, Reuben, and later the teenager Esau were caught in an impossible, monstrous bind. They were ordered to rape, to participate in the forced impregnation of Catherine's daughters, or face unspeakable consequences: whipping, being sold south to the brutal rice swamps, or even death. There was no real choice, no escape from the horror. After the war, Abram, finally free to speak his truth, told a northern journalist that raping Julia felt like tearing out my own throat and still having to breathe. Can you even begin to comprehend that level of psychological torment? The act of violence forced upon him, the self-inflicted wound to his own soul, yet still having to endure, to survive. And yet, in Catherine's warped reality, these men weren't victims, they were breeding sires. She meticulously recorded their forced couplings, and, with perverse logic, rewarded them with extra rations when the girls became pregnant. It was a grotesque incentive, a further layer of dehumanization, reducing them to mere biological functions. But the psychological torment didn't end with conception, not by a long shot. Each man was forced to watch his children, his own children, grow up in chains, to see them beaten for not picking cotton fast enough, to witness their suffering without being able to intervene. They could claim no fatherhood, no connection, no protection. To do so was to invite Catherine's wrath. Abram, in a moment of desperate, heartbreaking defiance, tried once. He called little Romulus son, within earshot of an overseer. The consequences were swift and brutal. Catherine ordered 75 lashes for Abram, a savage punishment designed to break him, to erase any shred of paternal claim. And, in an act of calculated cruelty, she had Romulus, then just 5 years old, watch the entire ordeal. Her stated reason? So the boy would know his place. It was a lesson in power, in property, in the absolute subjugation of human connection. The scars on Abram's back, a permanent map of his suffering, were so severe they were photographed in 1867. That harrowing image is still online, preserved in the archives of the Library of Congress, a stark reminder of the physical and psychological violence inflicted upon these men and their families. In May 1858, Catherine, ever planning, ever calculating, decided it was time to expand her twisted dynasty further. She planned to pair 14-year-old Remus, Julia's son, with an 18-year-old enslaved woman named Dove. Her hope was to secure a second generation of Henley blood, without needing to involve her daughters directly anymore. She envisioned an ever-expanding, self-sustaining labor force, all genetically linked to her. But Julia, by then 19 and pregnant for the 5th time, was not the docile, broken girl Catherine imagined. She was a woman hardened by years of unimaginable trauma, yet imbued with a fierce, quiet strength. She learned of Catherine's new scheme, and risking everything, managed to slip a small, desperate note to Dove. It simply read, "When the moon is down, run." It was a powerful, silent act of solidarity, a flicker of hope in the suffocating darkness. Dove, seizing her chance at freedom, escaped into the swamps. But the odds were stacked against her. She was caught within 3 days, dragged back to the plantation. Catherine, determined to crush any spark of rebellion, ordered a public punishment: 39 stripes from the overseer's whip, a brutal spectacle designed to terrify anyone who dared to dream of freedom. And then, as a permanent mark of her defiance and Catherine's ownership, Dove was branded on the thigh with the letter R, for runaway. The night after the whipping, Julia waited. She waited until her mother, oblivious, drank her usual rum-laced milk, her nightly sedative. Then, at 2 a.m., with the courage born of desperation and a deep, burning sense of injustice, Julia crept downstairs. She stole the plantation keys, a monumental act of theft that could cost her her life. With trembling hands, she unlocked the jail, not just for Dove, but for others. She led 7 people, 7 souls yearning for freedom, out into the darkness, guiding them toward the river. An enslaved man named Caleb, risking his own life, rowed them 6 miles downstream to a free black settlement known as the Ridge, a beacon of hope in a world of oppression. Catherine's dogs, her relentless trackers, were on their trail at dawn. The confrontation that followed must have been terrifying. But in that crucial moment, Julia, despite her own pain and fear, stood in front of the runaways, a shield of defiance. She faced the overseer and declared with unwavering resolve, "You will pass only through me." No eyewitness recorded what happened next, the precise details lost to history, but the outcome is clear. All 7 fugitives made it to the Ridge and found their freedom. Julia, however, was dragged back to the attic, her act of heroism met with swift, brutal reprisal. Catherine's diary entry for that day, stark and chilling, simply reads, "Daughter requires correction. Correction applied." 2 days later, Julia miscarried. It was a devastating, heartbreaking cost of her courageous act, a stark reminder of the brutal price of resistance under such a tyrannical regime. When Union troops finally reached coastal Georgia in 1863, the world as Catherine Henley knew it was crumbling. The distant rumble of cannons was no longer just a rumor, it was a reality, bringing with it the terrifying promise of upheaval and the potential loss of her most prized possessions, her enslaved people. Ever the pragmatist, Catherine packed her most valuable stock, the human beings she considered her property, and fled inland, desperately trying to preserve her economic empire. She tried to bring Julia and Adeline with her, to maintain control over her daughters and their children, her dynasty. But after years of confinement, of forced pregnancies, of watching their own children born into bondage, the sisters had reached their breaking point. They refused. They clung to bedposts, screaming, their voices raw with defiance and years of pent-up rage. They would not be moved. Not by Catherine, not by the war. In a fit of vengeful fury, a desperate act of spite, and an attempt to destroy incriminating evidence, Catherine retaliated. She set fire to her own weaving house, a place that held so many dark memories. The flames consumed years of textile work, the fruits of forced labor, and, she hoped, every trace of her breeding ledger. She wanted to erase the paper trail, to burn away the undeniable proof of her monstrous acts. But she missed one volume, one small, thin pocket notebook, which she had, ironically, lent to an overseer, escaped the conflagration. That book, its edges charred and brittle, surfaced almost 60 years later, in 1921. It was found tucked inside the lining of an old trunk, bought at an estate sale by someone completely unaware of the horrors it contained. This small, fire-damaged ledger, written in Catherine's distinctive spidery hand, meticulously lists 62 forced couplings, 21 births, and 6 deaths. It is a chilling, tangible record of her depravity, a window into the cold, calculating mind of a woman who treated human life as mere chattel. Today, that fragile book rests in a climate-controlled vault at the Georgia Archives, a precious, horrifying artifact. Researchers who wish to view its contents must sign a waiver, acknowledging the profound emotional toll the material can take. It's not just history, it's a direct encounter with unimaginable suffering, preserved for all time. After emancipation, Julia and Adeline didn't wait for permission. They simply walked off the plantation, barefoot, their spirits battered but unbroken. The Union soldiers who were meticulously documenting the newly freed recorded their names as Henley, no ages given, a stark illustration of how slavery stripped individuals of their very identity, even their birthright of age. Julia, now 32 but looking far older, carried Romulus and Remus, who were then 11 and 10, along with her toddler daughter, Celeste, the last child born in the attic. Adeline trailed behind, a silent procession with her 4 boys, each fathered by a different man, each a living testament to Catherine's cruel regime. They headed for the Ridge, the same free black settlement that had sheltered Dove years earlier, a place that represented hope and community. Census takers in 1870 eventually found Julia living in a one-room cabin, working as a washerwoman. She was still only 32, yet the years of trauma and forced labor had stooped her like an old woman. Her body bore the marks of her captivity, but her spirit, though weary, endured. Romulus and Remus, seeking to shed the name of their oppressor, took the surname Freeman, a powerful declaration of their newfound liberty. But even then, the system found ways to subtly erase and distort. Census clerks, either through misunderstanding or indifference, mangled it to Fremont. Despite these struggles, life took root. Dozens of their descendants still live along the Ogeechee River, a living legacy of resilience. When I visited last spring, a great-great-grandson, a man whose eyes held both pain and pride, showed me a family Bible. Inside, an old, faded entry for Romulus simply stated, "Father unknown," but someone at some point had taken a pen and, with a firm hand, crossed out "Father unknown" and wrote in its place, "Father stolen by slavery." That single powerful edit, a quiet act of historical reclamation, took 150 years to make. It wasn't just changing a name, it was rewriting a narrative, reclaiming a truth that had been deliberately obscured, acknowledging the profound injustice that had shaped their family's very origins. It's a testament to the enduring power of family, memory, and the slow, arduous journey toward truth. Catherine Henley, the architect of such unimaginable cruelty, died in 1879, utterly bankrupt. The war that had freed her stock had also irrevocably shattered her world. Cotton prices collapsed after the war, plunging the Southern economy into chaos, and her creditors, with no regard for her former power, seized what little remained of her land. The woman who had once commanded an empire of acres and human lives spent her final years boarding in a savannah tenement, a stark and desolate contrast to her former grandeur. She sold off her jewelry piece by piece, a slow, humiliating diminishment of her once vaunted wealth. Neighbors remembered her pacing the halls at night, a restless, spectral figure, muttering incessantly about my empire of blood. Even in her decline, her mind clung to the twisted legacy she had tried to forge, a testament to her unyielding delusion. She left no will, no final testament to her wishes, perhaps because there was nothing left to bequeath, or perhaps because she simply refused to acknowledge the end of her reign. The city buried her unceremoniously in a potter's field, a pauper's grave. The grave number, her last tangible link to the earth, was lost forever when the field was paved over for a railroad spur. No marker exists, no stone commemorates her life, a stark and fitting end for a woman who sought to brand others with her name and control their destinies. Yet, despite her attempts to control life and death, her DNA lives on. It persists in more than 500 documented descendants, some black, some white, some claiming both heritages. They are all, in their own ways, piecing together how they fit into a family tree that was never a tree at all, but rather a tangled, cruel net thrown over human bodies. It's a testament to the enduring, inescapable legacy of her actions, a family forged not in love or shared lineage, but in coercion and trauma, a complex tapestry woven with threads of both suffering and resilience. Her empire of blood, as she called it, did not vanish with her. It transformed, a living, breathing, and often painful inheritance for generations to come. In the modern era, descendants have turned to a powerful new tool to reclaim what documents and deliberate acts of erasure tried to hide: DNA. A groundbreaking project, aptly named the Henley Freeman Genealogy Initiative, has been instrumental in this historical detective work. They've tested more than 200 volunteers, meticulously comparing genetic markers, seeking the echoes of a past deliberately obscured. The results have been astonishing, a scientific validation of the oral histories and fragmented records. They show a 28% overlap between white Henleys and black Freemans, an incredibly high, almost unbelievable match for people who lived on opposite sides of the color line for centuries, separated by the chasm of race and systemic injustice. This isn't just a statistical anomaly, it's undeniable proof of a shared, complicated ancestry. One white Henley, a retired teacher named Paul, discovered through the initiative that he shares a significant segment on chromosome 3 with 3 different black Fremont cousins. When we spoke on Zoom, his voice thick with emotion, he teared up. "My ancestor," he said, his voice a raw whisper, "did not just own people, he fathered them and then denied them. I cannot unknow that." It was a profound moment of reckoning, a personal confrontation with the brutal realities of his family's past, and a powerful recognition of the humanity that had been denied for so long. The cousins, united by science and a shared, painful history, have since held joint reunions on the old plantation grounds, which are now, ironically, a vast pine plantation owned by a timber company. They gather and picnic under the towering loblolly pines where the attic, that place of Julia and Adeline's confinement and suffering, once stood. In a deeply moving ritual, they read Julia's charcoal prayer out loud together, a collective act of remembrance and healing, giving voice to a prayer whispered in desperation so long ago. Romulus and Remus, those boys named for emperors, would be long-grown men by now, but their grandchildren and great-grandchildren still flinch when they hear the word dynasty. For them, it's not a symbol of power or lineage. It's a chilling reminder of coercion, trauma, and the enduring shadow of a past that refuses to be forgotten. Catherine's scheme, in its sheer audacity and cruelty, is often dismissed as the isolated madness of one particularly deranged woman. But to view it that way is to miss the profound, chilling truth. Her actions, as monstrous as they were, are inseparable from a larger system that not only permitted, but actively rewarded reproductive coercion with immense economic gain. By 1860, the monetary value of enslaved people in the South, their market price, their worth as property, actually exceeded the combined value of every railroad, every factory, and every bank in the entire country. Think about that for a moment. Human beings were not just a commodity. They were the most valuable commodity, the engine driving an entire economy. And when you commodify human bodies, when you reduce people to mere units of production, someone, somewhere, will always find a way to maximize output, to extract every possible ounce of profit. Catherine Henley simply removed the usual middle layer, the enslaved women who were routinely forced to breed, and, in a grotesque innovation, inserted her own white daughters into the equation. This allowed her to keep the profits, the stock, even closer, ensuring her ownership was both legal and, in her twisted mind, genetic. Understanding that cold, brutal logic is not just an academic exercise. It is absolutely crucial because chilling versions of it persist even today. From the coerced sterilizations of vulnerable women in 20th century asylums deemed unfit to reproduce, to the insidious networks of modern human trafficking, where bodies are bought, sold, and forced into labor or sexual exploitation, the same variables appear again and again. Control reproduction, erase identity, and ultimately, profit. When we remember Julia and Adeline, when we confront the stark reality of Catherine's ledger, we are not just looking back at a forgotten horror. We are training our eyes, sharpening our moral compass, to spot these insidious patterns before another Catherine, in a different guise, decides to write a new ledger, to launch a new, equally dehumanizing scheme. This history isn't just about the past. It's a vital warning for the present and the future. There are still some locals, even today, who cling to the idea that Catherine Henley must have been insane. They'll insist, with a certain defensiveness, that no normal Southerner would do that to family. It's a convenient narrative, isn't it? To label her as a madwoman, an outlier, a monstrous exception, allows them to distance her actions from the broader societal fabric of the time. It lets them preserve a sanitized, romanticized vision of the antebellum South. But Catherine's own plantation journals tell a very different story. Far from being unhinged, they reveal a woman with a meticulously sharp business sense. She wasn't raving, she was calculating. She sold surplus cotton at premium prices, always finding the best markets. She shrewdly invested in railroad stock, diversifying her assets. And she kept double-entry accounts, a sophisticated system that would impress any modern MBA student. She was not insane. She was, in fact, terrifyingly rational. She operated perfectly within a system that explicitly dehumanized black people, reducing them to chattel, to property, to livestock. And simultaneously, she was operating within a system that viewed white women, even her own daughters, as little more than vessels for male lineage, or in her case, for her own perverse interpretation of a dynasty. The real horror, the truly unsettling truth, isn't that Catherine was a madwoman. It's how sane, how utterly logical you can be while doing unspeakable things, especially if the law, society, and economic incentives all conspire to call those human beings property. When we hide behind the crazy exception narrative, when we dismiss figures like Catherine as mere aberrations, we let the entire system off the hook. We absolve ourselves of the uncomfortable truth that countless normal people made countless normal choices within that system, choices that collectively made such atrocities not just possible, but inevitable. We erase the everyday complicity, the quiet approvals, and the systemic structures that enabled such profound inhumanity. It's a dangerous myth, and one we must actively dismantle if we ever hope to truly understand the past and avoid repeating its darkest chapters. If you are an educator, a parent trying to navigate difficult conversations with your children, or even just someone who gives tours at historic sites, please resist the urge to soften Catherine Henley into a caricature. Don't reduce her to a cartoon villain, a one-dimensional monster. Instead, present the receipts, literally. Show students the stud ledger, that chilling document that reduced human beings to breeding stock. Show them the price lists, the auction records that tallied human worth in dollars. Show them the runaway ads, those desperate pleas for information. Describing human beings down to their scars, their missing teeth, their brands, all marks of their suffering and their individuality. These aren't just historical documents, they are visceral, tangible connections to a brutal past. Then, once you've laid out the undeniable evidence, ask the hard questions, engage your audience, provoke critical thought. Ask, what would you risk to stop this if you lived next door? Would you speak up at church, knowing the social and economic consequences? Would you boycott cotton cloth, knowing it was produced by forced labor, by the very system you abhor? These aren't hypothetical questions for a distant past. They are questions that tether the past to today's choices about labor, about consumption, about the profound moral weight of silence. History, you see, is not a horror movie we can simply walk out of, shaking our heads and dismissing it as fiction. It is a mirror. It reflects back to us the best and worst of humanity, the choices made, the systems created. And it's up to us whether we keep that mirror clean, allowing it to show us the unvarnished truth, or if we allow it to distort, to blur, to sanitize the uncomfortable realities until they become unrecognizable. To truly learn from history, we must be brave enough to look directly into that mirror, even when what it reflects is profoundly unsettling. Romulus Freeman, the boy named after an emperor by his grandmother, grew up to become a blacksmith, forging metal with a strength that mirrored his spirit. He married a woman named Lizzie from the Ridge Settlement, the same haven that had offered refuge to his mother and so many others. Together they built a family, a legacy of their own, raising 10 children. And in a quiet yet profound act of reclaiming their identity, Romulus and Lizzie gave their children classical names, like Victoria and Octavius, a subtle yet powerful reappropriation of the Roman fantasy Catherine had imposed upon them. It was a reclaiming of power, a defiant assertion of their own lineage and dignity. Remus, Romulus's younger brother, took a different path. He moved to Savannah, a bustling port city, and found work on the docks. There, amidst the grit and camaraderie of the longshoremen, he became an organizer, a voice for justice. He played a crucial role in organizing the pivotal 1880 longshoremen strike, a collective action that, against considerable odds, successfully won a 10-cent hourly raise for the workers. It was an early, powerful victory for labor rights, and Remus, the boy born into utter powerlessness, was at its heart. Both brothers lived lives of quiet dignity and impactful action, eventually dying in the 1890s. Their final resting places, sadly, were in unmarked graves, a common fate for many formerly enslaved people, another lingering injustice. Yet their legacy, their true dynasty, lives on. Their descendants now include teachers, shaping young minds, nurses, healing bodies, truck drivers, connecting communities, and even a NASA engineer, a brilliant mind who helped design the insulation tiles for the space shuttle. When asked how she handles the weight of her family history, that NASA engineer, Dr. Camille Fremont Haynes, offered a profound insight. She told me, her voice steady and thoughtful, "I carry Julia's silence and her scream at the same time. That tension, that duality of pain and resilience, that's where I build my rockets." It's a powerful metaphor, isn't it? The ability to transmute historical trauma, to hold both the suffering and the survival into a driving force for innovation and progress. It speaks to the incredible strength and enduring spirit of those who emerged from Catherine Henley's dark shadow, not broken, but transformed, ready to reach for the stars. On dark, unlit rural roads near the old plantation, if you venture out on a clear night, you can still see the Milky Way spilling across the sky. It looks, eerily, like scattered cotton, a celestial field stretching into infinity, a haunting reminder of the earthly fields that bore so much pain. Stand there long enough, under that vast, silent expanse, and you will feel the tug of an unanswerable question, a profound query that hangs in the air like the scent of pine and damp earth. How many other Catherine Henleys never got caught? How many ledgers burned completely, leaving no trace, no paper trail, no proof of their monstrous acts? We will never know the full extent of those hidden histories, the countless stories buried beneath layers of time, shame, and deliberate destruction. But here's the hopeful truth. Every single time a descendant takes a DNA test and finds a match that history books or family myths said could not exist, another page rewrites itself. Every connection made, every family tree extended, every forgotten name resurrected, chips away at the silence. The archive, you see, is never truly closed. It just waits for someone brave enough to spit in a tube, hit send, and embark on a journey of discovery that can rewrite not just their own family history, but the broader narrative of a nation. It's a testament to the enduring power of truth, slowly, painstakingly, emerging from the shadows. Julia Henley, the woman who endured so much, never learned to read a book, but she understood, deeply and instinctively, that names carry power. When she whispered to Dove, "When the moon is down, run," she wasn't just giving an instruction. She was rewriting the only book she had, the night itself, using its darkness as a canvas for freedom. Catherine Henley wanted a dynasty, a neat, controlled lineage. What she got, instead, was a diaspora, a scattering of lives propelled by war, by emancipation, and by the fierce, unyielding choices of those she sought to control. Today, the Henley-Freeman bloodline stretches far beyond the red clay of Georgia. It reaches to California, from the vibrant pews of black churches to the quiet classrooms where Paul, the retired teacher, now gives talks on privilege and reckoning with the past. None of this, let's be absolutely clear, erases the whip, the suffocating attic, the searing brand. The pain, the trauma, the sheer injustice of it all remains. But what it does prove, with undeniable force, is that human beings are not inert clay, easily molded and broken. We are seeds, resilient and tenacious, capable of bursting through the hardest brick, finding light even in the deepest darkness. So if you leave with anything today, leave with this. The past is not past until we decide to stop repeating it. It lingers, it echoes, it demands our attention. And every single time we choose consent over coercion, every time we champion autonomy over ownership, we pull another brick from Catherine's crumbling, blood-stained empire. Tell the story, remember the names, honor the resilience, and should someone ever try to sell you a romantic, whitewashed version of antebellum life, hand them Julia's charcoal prayer. Ask them to read it out loud. Then, just watch how quickly the moon comes down.